Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Objective. Today I've got Marco and Richard with me. Now, today we're talking about Noa Argamani, who I think everyone kind of escaped notice, was rescued a few days ago, along with three other hostages who are being held in Gaza. And Noa Argamani had become the face of the hostages in many ways, along with a couple of others. So this is a kind of momentous event. Not only that she was saved, but these three others as well. But she's receiving a lot of the focus and attention in the last few days. So, Marco, Richard, why don't you tell us a little bit more about her story?
Yeah, so obviously she was at the Nova Music Festival along with friends on the 7th of October before she was abducted on the back of that motorbike. And famous piece of footage where she's pleading with the Hamas, please don't kill me. And then she was taken away, taken into Gaza, and held there for 245 days in captivity. And it seems that the standard operation here is to move people about from domestic house to domestic house in the keeping of one family of Gazans or another. That seems to be the standard practice. I know, for example, that she was she was moved only at night, so she hadn't seen the light for that whole 245 days. And she was dressed as an Arab when she was being forcibly moved between locations in order to obviously keep her location as a secret for as long as possible. And that in itself goes to show how impressive the IDF operation was, together with Shin Bet intelligence and the Israeli police that are enabled to pull this together and work out where she was at the precise where she was and where other hostages were at the moment when they could go in and rescue her and the others, because it's obviously that it provides a fairly short window, and you wouldn't even know how short that window was before she'd be moved to another location.
Yeah, of course, the whole operation was absolutely brilliant militarily. Unfortunately, one of the Shin Bet officers died as a result of the injuries that he sustained. And he was injured because the Palestinians, the Gazans, they were hiding in this residential area, in the residential buildings, fought back and tried to stop the IDF from rescuing the hostages. So let's remember that here we have hostages in the center of Gaza, in a residential area, in somebody's homes, and as Richard pointed out, they were moved about 4 times. Noah reported that she was moved 4 different locations with 4 different sets of people. Of course, we should also remember that the people, the Gazans, who are not Hamas apparently, are actually paid by Hamas about $20 a day in order to keep an eye on the hostages. And of course, it's a big logistical exercise to look after hostages. And even if they weren't treated particularly bad, they weren't treated very well either. First of all, they're captive. So how can they possibly be happy in the first place? But to keep them alive, you need to provide water, food, and make sure they don't escape. So the idea that the Gazans don't know about Hamas and they're not supporting it, whether implicitly or explicitly, is just a farce.
And of course, some of the stories that have come out from the hostages, some of them have been given food when they require it, some of them less so. I think one of the other hostages described how she lost a lot of weight and some of her hair and those kind of things. So it's obviously a deeply traumatic experience, as you would well imagine.
Yes, I think unfortunately, as Twitterers want to do, when people found out she'd been rescued, there was an awful lot of people who were pointing out, oh, she doesn't look as poorly treated as she could have been, as if therefore it was all okay. It completely just, I guess, trying to avoid the fact that kidnapping someone and keeping them hostage is not exactly a peaceful thing to do, although that seemed to be what they were wanting to imply. Now let's talk a little bit more about the details of where she was being held, because I think, as you were kind of mentioning, and originally she was held in one location that wasn't exactly very good, and then she was moved into the household of a rich family, if I'm getting that right. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe that's what I've heard. I mean, I've read one of the things that's come out is that she was originally held with another hostage, a hostage called Moran Stella Yanai, who was one of those who was released back in November as part of the hostage deal, who was in captivity for 54 days. Now, so they were held together initially, and she said, Noa said that, you know, she thought, you know, I hope to see you soon, when they were separated, and she was moved to a separate location, but of course never realizing that it would be another good 200 days on from that before that would be possible. And some of what already Moran Stelly and I had told us about her experiences back on October the 7th and in captivity are enlightening on this, what it's like for hostages over there. I mean, she tried to, on October the 7th, this woman, Moran, she tried to pretend to be Arab a number of times, and managed to not be taken initially by a group of Hamas terrorists on October the 7th, but then a final group who really didn't care took her, and it would seem that they were Gazans. You know, they're all Gazans, they're all Palestinians. The distinction is moot, to say the least, but these were civilians who were taking the opportunity, and they sold her to Hamas. After you know, she was brought into Gaza, and she describes in some of the interviews when she was released what it was like to see, partly through the vehicle as she was being brought into Gaza, and she describes the crowds of people, the men, the women, the children, all happy and elated. She described it was like being a bull being brought into an arena, and her only way of coping was to close her eyes. And then she also described what it was like to move from house to house, because there were some things, she said, that you develop certain survival skills, she said. And she said one of the things you do is in each location, you don't talk about the previous location. You don't tell your current hostage takers anything about who held you in the past, because then if you do so, then it's, particularly if you indicate that you were sexually badly treated or something, they may well just kill you, because they may consider you, you know, dirty or whatever. They may treat you totally differently. So you want to preserve a complete, you want to box off each setting in its own place simply as a survival technique. Those kind of things you could honestly never imagine going through, let alone, you know, coping with a degree of fortitude that so many of them seem to have done.
Yeah, as Richard pointed out earlier on, when Noa was moved from one place to the next, she was wearing a Hamas uniform, i.e., dressed as a civilian, and this is another proof that Hamas doesn't really care about rules of war. The rules of war that Israel is forced to follow and condemned for not following, you know, even if they do follow them. And the condition. The people on Twitter who comment about the conditions say, "Oh, they don't seem very badly." Actually, they're a bunch of idiots, because, of course, yeah, physically, if you look at them, they look more or less fine. But the hospital, the scan, and the test showed that they had massive amount of muscle wastage because they didn't get enough food, so they didn't have any proteins, and they didn't see daylight. So your metabolism is so screwed up. But what's more important, the psychology, their psychology, they must be so incredibly scarred by the whole ordeal. Let alone, you know, these people were at the Nova Festival. They went there to spend a nice time, to have some time, listen to music and with their friends, and suddenly they find themselves in this middle of this carnage, this horror that lasted, you know, 240 odd years.
I mean, people said the same when those hostages were released back in November. People made the same hideous accusations that don't they look well? And again, Moran, you know, the woman she was kept with, has spoken about this and told how they were told to smile, and how they were threatened with the fact that it could be called off at any stage, their release, and then they needed to smile and put on a good face until they were safely in the hands of the IDF. And Moran says she was speaking to a little boy and trying to keep him happy as she was being released. And it wasn't until she was in Israeli hands that she could properly, you know, release the emotions that she'd kept contained for such a long period. So people are heartless and evil if they evade away to that extent the experience of the hostages, the conditions they were held in, and try and, you know, warp reality to fit the reality they would like to believe, rather than the one that we obviously live in and is hideous case.
So we have a $5 super chat from Jonathan. Thank you very much. Who says, "Watch the video of the IDF rescue. Amazing job by true heroes, and thank you to ARC UK for being a voice of reason during this debate." Also, F Al Jazeera. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Yeah, so I've seen some of the video of the rescue floating around on Twitter as well. I think the one, because so you guys can correct me if I'm getting these details wrong. I think were the three other hostages being held in kind of surrounding houses, but not in the same house that Noa Argamani was in. I think the video that I've seen is just of these other guys being rescued. I don't think there's footage of her rescue going around. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Actually, the story she told was that she was, because of course these nice Palestinian people, these Gazans, the people were supposed to consider victims and refugees for the rest of their days. They were holding her not only hostage, but they were treating her as a slave. She was forced to do the dishes. She wasn't fed enough. So at the time when the IDF broke in, she was doing the dishes, and she assumed that they were just kidding her, where they were shouting, "We're here to rescue." So she didn't move until one of the soldiers said, "Is that all right if I put you on my shoulder so I can take you out?" And then she finally realized what happened. And as I said, she was doing the dishes for the slave owning family of Palestinians she was captured and kept by. And that in itself is such a disgusting ordeal. Anyone who denies the fact that the Palestinians and Hamas are one and the same is just trying to kid themselves and try not to see what reality is.
And obviously, after her return, she's been speaking to Shin Bet, to the chief of Shin Bet, Ronan Bar, to describe a lot of the details about how she was held, how she was moved, and all of those kind of facts that obviously assist in future attempts at rescues and future understanding of how the network works within Gaza. So we're going to have to see what comes of that, or whether, of course, the condition of other hostages worsens, which is possible after a rescue of this nature, when Hamas may decide to, or certainly move their locations, no doubt, and of course maybe make those conditions worse as a collective punishment, as they want to do against those hostages. So, but of course, that isn't something we can concern ourselves about at the moment, when there's so much to celebrate, in the sense that you've got these four released, and as particularly Noa, because as you said, she was kind of the face of October the 7th itself, and to see her celebrating her father's birthday in the medical center near Tel Aviv, and of course meeting her her mother, who's been dying with brain cancer, stage 4 brain cancer, and is able to apparently only acknowledge the fact that she's free, but it's not much able to communicate beyond that. But those kind of things are that's the most positive side of this, and of course that's given a big lift to people in Israel, and of course everyone concerned about the hostages, and of course made them the focus once more of some of the media coverage, when they've been very much hidden in the focus on the Al Jazeera side of the story, the Palestinian propaganda side that has dominated our headlines across the world.
Yes, the race against the clock to get her back in time, whilst her mother is still with us, was definitely one of the kind of awful sides of this story, and it almost is miraculous, really, that they've managed to get her back. And there is that wonderful scene of her reuniting with her father. Now, and as Jonathan's pointing out in the chat, which you guys are mentioning, is that these people were all either physically or psychologically tortured. And, it's luckily that, at least so far as we can see, there's not much physical harm to her, at least at this time. But psychologically, I think all of these people are going to, in the photos that we're seeing, obviously they're very elated, they're very happy. There was another touching moment with one of the other hostages, I think his name is Andre, of when his mother came to visit him in the hospital, and he just sort of collapses almost straight away because he sees his mother. But almost certainly all of these people are going to require therapy for years, I would have to have thought, to recover the psychological from the psychological damage from all of this. Now we have some more super chats. We have $10 from Wes, thank you very much, and $1 from Bonnie. But sorry, go on, Richard.
I was just going to say that there's a sad parallel to that story, much as it's great to see her reunited with her mother, which is the story of Alamov Mia Jan, whose father died literally hours. I think literally only a few hours before, wasn't it? Yeah. Before his release. At a pretty young age. I think he was in his 50s because of the stress and the trauma of worrying about his son, and unfortunately he missed seeing the fact that he was freed so close to the moment, which is heartbreaking, but a sad truth of the alternative here. But yeah, and of course, even for Noa herself, her own boyfriend Avinatan is still held captive by Hamas. And of course, many of the people that she went to the festival with, many of her friends, died at a concert. So she's got an awful lot to process, and one can't possibly imagine how traumatic that must be to go through. But the elation it comes from obviously being freed and being safe when you never thought you would be. But there must be an awful burden upon any individual after such an ordeal.
And of course, people will say, "Oh, she's been lucky." Well, first of all, going through the kind of ordeal from the Noma Festival to the release, it cannot possibly be anything lucky about it. It's lucky the fact that the outcome was positive for her to a certain extent. Of course, as you mentioned, she will have to probably go through all sorts of treatment for a psyche or whatever. But the tragic story here is that 120 people are still held. So if they're still alive, they are still suffering the kind of stuff that she went through and all the other people went through. And there's the danger now, as Richard was pointing out, that now Hamas will kill them straight away if they realize the IDF is getting anywhere near them, trying to save them. And so from one point of view is a very good news. The other point of view is kind of will make a further operation probably more dangerous and harder for the IDF to pull off. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, despite being a sort of national jubilation going on at the moment, at the same time, the family of the officer who died during the operation, who was commanding the Yamam at the time, the operation side, they are coping with the death of this very young guy. And at the same time, when they see the rest of Israel celebrating this event, it can be easy. I can imagine it's a very traumatic time for lots of people right now.
Sorry, my Zoom is unmuting in a strange way. Yes, I mean, one of the unbelievable things that was in the reporting after this, obviously we did a show about the media reaction, was I think it was a BBC presenter interviewing someone from a think tank who about this, and she was asking about, did the IDF call ahead and warn the Palestinians that this was going to be going on? And he sort of has to speak to her, unfortunately, like a child, and say, well, no, because if they did that, they may well have executed all the hostages and so on. And it's part of the remarkable things about this rescue operation is that they were able to do so completely secretly. And Jesse, one of our channel members in the chat, says one of the most disturbing parts of all this is that clearly Gazans are conditioned to perceive this all as normal or just ho-hum. That's scary. And one of the, I guess, heartening things that I saw related to this was one of the men who was injured. So one of these Palestinians who, I think the number being floated around is 210 who were injured in the operation. There was a video of him recorded where he's, I think, still bleeding. And he's actually almost kind of breaking down, going on a rant about how Hamas are terrible. They've led us to all this. They don't care about us and so on. And he's doing it to a crowd surrounding him. And they seem not quite sure what to make of it, at least at first. They sort of are kind of listening to him a bit gingerly, and then when he really starts laying into Hamas, they kind of start going, "Oh, no, calm down, stop saying that." Da, da, da. And it's hard to gauge exactly, is that because they're terrified of repercussions coming upon them or upon him, or are we seeing a general kind of dissatisfaction spreading amongst people with Hamas about having put them in this situation. So, but I agree with Jesse's comment that there has to be an awful lot of complicity in all of this for this to have been going on. It's not exactly as if Gaza is this huge place, and far too many of them seem to be perfectly content with all of this. And now we have another super chat for $5 from Gigi Ryder. Thank you very much. She says, people who are often raped or severely injured by psychos often had an intimate and good relationship with the person who did that to them. I suppose is that, I don't know, referring to the idea that maybe Noa had a good relationship with her captors. I don't know if that's actually a detail of the story that we have so far.
I think it's called Stockholm Syndrome, isn't it? It's a kind of relationship between the captive and the captive.
I'm not sure that's the case here, though. I think what she's described was simply the fact that she tried to stay strong. She used things like mindfulness to try and keep her focus and just think about hopefully one day being rescued and just take it a day at a time. I think so. I'm not sure this is a lot of this is how people think hostages ought to be released if they'd really suffered, and if they're trying to do some moral equivalency between the pictures they've seen relentlessly thrown at them by Hamas propaganda and hoping to see an equivalent of that for Israeli hostages being released, which is such a distorted morality as not to bear examining.
Yes. Okay, guys. Are there any other aspects of Noah's story that we should inform people of just whilst we're in the final few minutes?
I think the response in Israel, the morale boost that it gives, the fact that you've had at the time on screens in Tel Aviv, the fact that Noa had been freed, and the fact people have been were told on the beach by lifeguards that announced and were cheering and hugging and that kind of thing. At a time when Israel has been feeling the strain quite a bit, obviously, as you would expect, both at a government level and at a population level, and anything like this, which gives a morale boost, is obviously welcome. But that comes in the context of losing another 4 soldiers, in the Gaza operations in Rafah. That was today, including the grandson of Fagin. I understand as one of them, and they're young lads in their 19, 20, 21, those kind of ages, and these are young people. These are people. It's hard to imagine being drafted in, and of course having to do the kind of operations that are required for the way that Israel is fighting this war, which is extremely tricky.
And of course, the Gazans are a bunch of cowards, really. As Richard said, these 4 people were actually killed in a building which was booby-trapped. So they don't even have the balls to fight face to face. But that's the kind of behavior they've been doing for the last 76 years old. And going back to the guy you were mentioning, condemning Hamas for what's happening. Well, if I was out to guess, that probably was acting for camera. These guys are professional whingers and victim players. They only squirm when they have to, but they don't mean it. In Islam, there is even a term for the simulation that you put up, even pretending not to be a believer in Allah, in order to get away with whatever you're doing, in order to not to get caught. So I wouldn't allow these guys an inch, to be honest, at this point. If you want to show your opposition for Hamas, do something about it. Take arms and start helping the good side, i.e. Israel. Everybody else in the West who's supporting this kind of activity, either by promoting propaganda news like we've seen, especially reporting this kind of the operation, which was a disgrace in the West, and the people on social media who cast doubt about the victims or everything else are just a bunch of evil people, really, and they deserve everything that will come to them.
And it's not just idiots on Twitter; it's people like the EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell, who described the reports of, quote, another massacre of civilians are appalling. He's talking about the Newsrat deaths of Palestinians in the course of this rescue. He said the bloodbath must end. I mean, this is the foreign policy chief in the EU, for goodness sake. It beggars belief how the morality has got so warped by so many and is nothing short of anti-Semitic.
And we have another super chat from Frank for $2 who says, please talk about Arnon Zamora, hero of the IDF. Now, I believe this is the soldier who lost his life, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yeah.
So much so that they renamed the operation just to celebrate his life, really. It's as I mentioned earlier on, it must be really sad for a family that are going through his loss, while everybody else is celebrating the release of the hostages.
And he was injured in it initially, but unfortunately died in a hospital afterwards. I think he was one of the first to break into one of the two buildings.
Because of course whoever mentioned that during the operation, the IDF soldiers were under constant fire from the innocent Palestinians who were shooting at them, and then as they leave the building with the hostages, they're still targeted with RPGs. So much so that a couple of armored vehicles were damaged, and they managed to escape on the third one. So the whole operation wasn't just a James Bond go in and go out. It was all the time under constant fire from the Gazans. So, and that's what adds a dimension of heroism to this operation.
And Arnon Zamora should absolutely be a name that everybody knows for his part in that, and clearly a war hero.
Unfortunately, although everyone in the West or everyone in the media sphere is wanting to talk about the loss of life amongst X number of civilians, and maybe occasionally they'll show sympathy towards the hostages, although frankly not all that well they show sympathy towards them. The lives of the IDF soldiers are the people whose lives are valued the least. These are people who didn't instigate the war, and yet whose lives are valued nothing by almost everybody. They're considered fair game, almost, I think, is the attitude that's shown towards them. So certainly it's a tragedy that this man's lost his life.
Yeah.
But okay, everybody, unless we have anything else, thank you very much for joining us. We've got the reality show coming up in just 2 minutes, and then at 7 o'clock we have the Atlas Shrugged Book Club. So I hope you guys will all join us for that. But thank you very much for joining us for the Daily Objective. We'll see you all in just a few minutes. Bye-bye.
Bye.